What's up, ladies and gents? Welcome to another live stream for Global History and Geography Regents Review. This is the second time I've tried this in the last couple of days. I did one recently on the multiple choice section from this particular exam. Okay, I've been going through the January 2025 Global History Regents. So if you check out 2 videos ago, I did a live stream covering the multiple choice, and then I did a pre-recorded video reviewing the CRQ. So what I thought I would do today is do a quick stream talking about some strategies for how to tackle the enduring issues essay. So if you guys, there's a couple of you guys watching, if you wouldn't mind doing me a favor and dropping a comment, let me know if you can hear and see everything okay, because I am still a little bit new to the whole live streaming thing, especially here from my classroom where I don't have all of my own equipment. So if you can give me some feedback, I would really appreciate that. But before we get into this, what you might want to think about doing is checking out all of my old content, because the format of the Global History Regents has not changed since 2019. And the content that's asked on the test, beautiful. Thanks so much for the feedback, guys. The content from the test has not changed in the last 6 years. So if you watch one of my old videos about, let's say, the multiple choice, the review is still good, even though you're preparing for the June 2025 exam. So go back and watch my old content for multiple choice, CRQ, and enduring issues. I have separate playlists for all 3 of those categories. And especially focus on those that enduring issues video if you're interested in hearing what I have to say today, because in the pre-recorded enduring issues video that I did last year or the year before, I think it was the year before, it's very, very thorough. I don't have the time to do a complete review of every document from January 2025, but I'm going to go through reading a document with you guys, taking some notes, and talking about strategies, and I will write along with you guys a sample introduction paragraph, a body paragraph, and a conclusion paragraph. Okay, so if you've never seen this before, hopefully you have, right? The Regents is in 2 days from the time of this live stream. This is the essay task, okay? Hopefully you guys can see this okay. So it says at the top here, identify and explain an enduring issue raised by this set of documents. Notice it says an enduring issue, right? You have to choose one issue that's common in at least 3 out of the 5 documents that's presented to you. Okay, some students get in the trap of writing about 3 separate enduring issues or even more, okay? And that's the tricky part about this. They want you to be able to find something common in a bunch of these documents. And they make that pretty easy. For example, from January 25, you can make a case that some enduring issues appear in all 5 of the documents. Okay, so identifying one shouldn't be too tough. When this live stream is over, I will go back and add in the description some of my materials that I give my own students. Okay, it couldn't hurt to look at a list of sample enduring issues that pop up on the Regents a lot, and I will provide that to you guys. But that's not all encompassing. There might be some enduring issues that are not on that list that you might be able to see for yourself. And that's totally okay. All right, so identify and explain one enduring issue. Okay, so mention it and explain what it is. Okay, we'll take care of that in the introduction paragraph. Argue why the issue you selected is significant and how it has endured across time using your knowledge of social studies and evidence from the documents. Okay, so something is significant if it impacts people, right? Usually if we say the word issue, we're implying that it's impacting people in a negative way. So we have to write about the documents and say how the documents have affected people in a negative way, but also include some outside information to do the same thing. So be sure to, in your essay, identify the enduring issue based on a historically accurate interpretation of at least 3 documents. So like I said before, one issue common in at least 3 out of the 5. It's better to write about 3 documents with detail and outside information than to try to write about all 5, but we'll talk more about that later. Okay, explain the issue using relevant evidence from at least 3 documents, like I said. Argue that this is a significant issue that has endured by showing 2 things. How the issue has affected people, which we already said. That's not going to be hard because the documents will tell us how the issue has affected people, right? It could be the way it impacts people's lives, or maybe it motivates people to take some kind of an action, right? Because a lot of people don't take enduring issues lying down. They maybe want to do something to resolve that enduring issue or at least lessen its impact. So we'll talk about that. and how the issue has continued to be an issue or has changed over time. And the way I like to deal with this bullet point is to address this in the conclusion paragraph by providing maybe more modern examples of how the issue is still current, but maybe also touching upon things, like I said before, how humans, I guess we could say, have tried to lessen the impact of the issue, because we're always trying to fix our issues. All right, and then finally, at the very bottom here, it says, include relevant outside information from your knowledge of social studies. Okay, I will show you an easy strategy for trying to do that, but if you're shooting to get a 5 out of 5 on the Enduring Issues essay, which you should shoot for that, you're going to want to include information that's not in the documents. Okay, so I'm not going to read and annotate every one of these documents for you, but let's talk about a couple of them perhaps. All right, so again, I am working through the January 2025 exam, and the documents that were on this one, and I hope it's the same for you guys in 2 days, are very short. And that's great, because by this point on the test, you're probably going to be a little bit burned out, right? There's a lot of reading and a lot of writing on the Regents, okay? So the multiple choice is gonna have a lot of reading. Your CRQ is gonna have a lot of reading. So by the time you're gonna get to the essay, you're gonna be a little bit fried. So it's good that maybe they're cutting down on the length of some of these documents for the Enduring Issues essay. Let me just shift gears here and give you a screen where you can see more of what I'm looking at. All right, just bear with me 1 second. I apologize. Live streaming is still a bit new for me. Let me just make this a little bit bigger, change the shape. That's much better. Let me just zoom in on this a little bit more. Hopefully you guys are doing okay in terms of your studies. All right, so what I'm going to do is take a look at document number 2, because this is a topic that maybe is a little bit less common on the Regents, so maybe we can use this as a general review opportunity outside of just talking about the essay. So when you get your Regents and you get to your Enduring Issues task, you're going to want to absolutely read these documents as part of your analysis. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to read this together, or I'm going to read it to you. It would be great if you could follow along if you have access to this Regents on your own. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight pieces of information that help me explain who, what, when, where, and why. Because when you're writing about a document on your essay, you're going to want to summarize it. Okay, and in doing so, you will touch upon how people were affected by a particular enduring issue, if you summarize this thing thoroughly enough, because they always mention the effects that the issue has on people in each of these documents, for the most part. Okay, and if this is starting to sound confusing, don't worry. I think it'll get more clear as we go. Again, if you could do me a favor, guys, and let me know if you can still see and hear me okay, I would really very much appreciate that. All right, so again, January 2025, this is the last Regents that was given, and let's take a look at document number 2. It says King Leopold of Belgium, and I'm going to highlight that because it's mentioning a who and a where, expanded his control of the Congo region. Okay, and just to give you some background on this, Congo is part of Central Africa, and the Belgians were one of the first countries to make a presence for themselves in the interior of Africa, okay, and they were really after, like most countries that went to Africa in the late 1800s, they were looking for natural resources and new markets, right? This is the era of European imperialism, okay? So, christened the Congo Free State in 1885, Leopold's playground was an astonishing 76 times the size of Belgium. So it's interesting, they're calling it Leopold's playground, right? Kind of implying that this is just like the king's private property, basically, and not actually part of the country of Belgium. In fact, it was 76 times larger than the country of Belgium, which is a very tiny country. Comprised largely of unmapped jungle, it was initially a huge financial burden. But when worldwide demand for rubber boomed, Leopold cashed in. Okay, so again, think about your time period. I appreciate the feedback on the visual and the audio. Thank you so much. So if it's Congo, if it's 1885, it's the it's the peak of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so countries are seeking raw materials to create things in their factories. Rubber is going to be a big deal in the Industrial Revolution, right? Assembly lines will, the products will move down a conveyor belt, right, from person to person on that assembly line, right? And each worker is fastening one part to the whole. You're going to need rubber for tires, okay, for bike tires and for car tires. So rubber is a big deal, and rubber trees are very abundant in the central part of Africa. So Leopold cashed in when the demand for rubber boomed. So initially this was a very expensive piece of property, but once they could start selling the rubber that was accumulated in Congo, it made owning, I guess, Belgium owning Congo a lot more affordable. Congolese workers were sent out into the jungle to slash down vines and layer their bodies with rubber latex. Okay, essentially, they were told to kind of cover their bodies in this rubber sap, I guess is the best way to kind of contain it, and then they would have to scrape this sap off themselves in order to turn it into the Belgians, and that would create quite the injury, I guess we could say. So later they would have to scrape the rubber off their skin, often taking flesh and hair with it. The work was labor intensive, so the working conditions weren't great, and injurious to health. The only economical way to collect it was via the forced mobilization of Congolese society, right? That's a fancy way of saying that the Congolese people were forced to collect this rubber, so they were basically enslaved by the Belgians. The Congo Free State evolved from a vanity possession into a slave plantation. Okay, so you have a couple of options right here. What I try to tell my kids to do, and this is going to depend on how much time you have, I recommend, if you do have a lot of time, to take notes on the main ideas associated with that document. And I label that as MI on my piece of paper here. Because if I write down a couple of main ideas and I choose to write about this document later, I'm not going to have to reread this source. I could just write about the brief phrases I'm going to put here, and that'll be good enough in terms of a document summary. However, at the risk of confusing you, if you don't have a lot of time, this might be something to skip, and maybe you'll prioritize taking notes on a couple other categories I'm going to get to in a second. Right? At the very least, underline or highlight some who, what, when, where, why stuff in the document. So if you go back and write about this thing later, you don't have to reread everything. Maybe just write about some of the things that you underlined or highlighted. But I'm going to assume we have a lot of time, so I'm going to write down who, what, when, where, and why. But I'm not going to use full sentences. I'm going to say 1885, comma, King Leopold of Belgium took control of Congo, and I'll put Central Africa in parentheses. I happen to know it's in Central Africa, so I'm just going to put that there. And I'll say profited off rubber, comma, high demand for it during IR. And when I say IR, I'm abbreviating, I'm saying Industrial Revolution. Okay, and I'll say forced Congolese to collect rubber, which caused injuries. Okay, so again, the reason why I'm doing this is, and granted, I've been doing this a long time, I'm pretty efficient when it comes to reading and note-taking, is if I choose to write about this document, I don't have to reread anything now. I could just take these bullet points and put them into a complete sentence or complete sentences when I'm summarizing this specific document. Okay, but again, if you're short on time, omit this piece of the note-taking strategy. Okay, the next thing I tell my students to do is write down outside information. I represent that with OI here on my paper. Okay, and outside information can come basically in two categories, right? One category that I try to suggest my students to write outside information about is historical circumstances. Like what's some of the stuff in history that led to the Belgians going to the Congo in the first place, right? Because if you could do that, it'll satisfy two things. It helps create a cohesive story that makes the document sound a little bit more full when you write about it. And if you include historical circumstances, you're going to check off the requirement for outside information. Okay? So when I see a document about Europeans in Africa, I'm going to write down a couple of things. I'm going to write scramble for Africa. I'll explain these in a second if you don't remember these things from your curriculum, from your classes, I should say. I'll write down Berlin Conference. And I'll write down Industrial Revolution. Okay, these are some historical circumstances for how or why the Belgians are there in the first place, right? So for example, the Industrial Revolution gives the Europeans an incentive to colonize new places because they need natural resources, right? If you're going to make things out of rubber, you need sources of rubber, and the rubber trees do not grow all around the world. So Europeans will seek out sources for that. Scramble for Africa is like this concept of European countries trying to get into Africa and grab up as much as possible. Okay, and what happens is, since there was this mad dash to grab land in Africa, that was going to fuel a potential conflict as European countries compete with each other for land in that continent. So what happens is, in 1884 to 85, I believe is the exact range of years, European countries sat at a table in Berlin, which is the capital of Germany, and they set the rules for how pieces of Africa could be taken over, right? In effect, this kind of eases the tension over grabbing up a bunch of African colonies, at least between the European powers, because everyone has a clear expectation of how the colonization should work. So that avoids conflict between European countries. But the Berlin Conference has massive long-term repercussions, because if you remember anything about that, right, when the Europeans redrew the map of Africa to suit their own interests, they either divided tribes or states that were in Africa, or they put groups together that didn't normally live together, right? And when European countries go home, right, those countries or those colonies that are now independent countries sometimes struggle with like ethnic and religious conflict, because again, there was so much ethnic diversity in these places ever since the Europeans redrew the map. Okay, but that's a story for a little bit later. But again, without the Scramble for Africa and the Berlin Conference and the Industrial Revolution, we probably don't have the Belgians going into the Congo, right? The Industrial Revolution also provides the Europeans with maybe superior military technology, which allows them to conquer the interior of Africa, whereas maybe before in the past, Europeans only set up like trading posts on the coast of Africa, right? Which was a big deal in maybe your 9th grade studies. Just a question here, do you have to include dates in your essay, or can you include relative time periods? Relative time periods should cover it, but if the document provides a date for you, it couldn't hurt to throw that in to make yourself sound a little bit more detailed, right? So I will probably build, and I'm going to build something like this, 1885, into my writing because it's given to me, all right? But Industrial Revolution, if I write about that as a historical circumstance for this document, I don't have to put the years of the Industrial Revolution, okay? So no, general time periods should cut it, but if they give you a date, might as well throw it into your paragraph. So these are historical circumstances for the Industrial Revolution. What I would also recommend doing is trying to write down some information that would help me illustrate how the enduring issues maybe continue into modern times, or examples of some things that humans have done to try to lessen the impacts of the enduring issues, okay? So we haven't talked about any specific enduring issues yet, so what we want to think about generally are other things in history that sound like this, right? So things in history that we learned about this year that sound like people being enslaved on behalf of the Europeans, okay? And maybe things that people have done to try to stop Europeans enslaving people. All right, so check out what I'm going to say here. I'm going to write down Haitian Revolution, because this is another example of Europeans enslaving colonists to produce things for the Europeans. And granted, this is not a current example, but it doesn't have to be super current, okay? And this is actually, if you really want to think about this, the Haitian Revolution happens long before 1885. Okay, but I could throw this in my conclusion paragraph to demonstrate that yes, the enduring issue continues over time, right? Maybe the Haitian Revolution happens, and that's one example of some issues. Then the Belgians in the Congo is another example that illustrates the same issue, whatever one we choose. Again, if this sounds confusing, it should be more clear later. So the point is, try to think of similar events in history that happened either before or after. And it can even go into present day. It could also even be United States history, ladies and gents, okay? That's often a secret that people don't know about. You can write about the US history stuff on the Global History Regents if you're using a historical example from US history to prove that an issue is enduring. All right, so Haitian Revolution, I'll put maybe sugar plantations for that one. Okay, I'm gonna write down here, international response was that Congo was taken from Leopold. Okay, so people started to find out just how horrible the Belgians treated the Congolese. And this is attributed to some new technology. I'm going to write down photography / Anna Harris. I show my students a bunch of segments of a History Channel program called what is it called? Why am I blanking at the moment? Mankind, the Story of All of Us. And there's a segment about how this Christian missionary in Congo named Anna Harris had a camera with her, and she took pictures of the Congolese who had had their hands chopped off because they did not collect enough rubber. And when that picture circulated, it went viral, and all of a sudden everyone knew about this, and all the countries of the world were basically telling Congo that they have to back off, that you can't mistreat people like this. Okay, so what did I do here? Historical circumstances. Another event in history that's similar to the document, right? To maybe prove that whatever problems are here are not new, right? The Haitian Revolution already happened. And responses, right? So again, we want to, just to go back to the essay task. I apologize if this seems disjointed. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, right? Take a look. How the issue has continued. Haitian Revolution can help us prove continuity because it's happening across history, or has changed over time. Right? So maybe with modern technology, people cannot get away with the same abuses because people find out about it now. Okay? So, finally, probably the most important thing is a category of notes for enduring issues. And here is where you want to write down any and all enduring issues that you might find in this document. Okay, and this is why I would recommend either check out my old Enduring Issues videos or wait until this live stream is over and I post my list that I give my students. It couldn't hurt to review that list and have a couple in the back of your head. Okay, so, pardon me, excuse me. I'm gonna write down a few. I'm gonna write down imperialism as an enduring issue, because I see one country taking over another, and that leads to some negative effects for the colonists. I'm going to say abuse of power, which is this idea that, a government takes action to suit their own interests rather than the interests of the people. I'll write down slavery, because I know slavery has happened across history, and slavery has led to some injuries for the Congolese. And I'm going to say absolutism, because absolutism as a form of government has existed throughout much of history, and we see a king taking action, right? And that was an absolute monarch. So that has caused some problems, right? When there's no checks and balances on a government, governments are capable of doing, I guess, some sketchy things. The reason why I would recommend brainstorming as many as you can is that when you're done looking at all the documents, you're going to have to choose one issue that's common in 3 out of the 5. So the more options you give yourself, the easier that's going to be. Okay? So write down as many as you think apply to this document. All right, so again, read the document, highlight or underline who, what, when, where, and why, if you can. If you have a lot of time, make yourself some main idea notes. Basically take your highlights or underlines and make them bullet points. because when we go to summarize a document, you could just write about this, brainstorm outside information, and you might not be able to come up with a lot of stuff for every document, and that's okay. But when you can, write down things in history that led to the document, because that is a nice way to have some outside information, and write down other events in history that are similar, because that can help us prove that the issue continues over time, or I guess I should say, things that have happened in history to change the issue. And what I mean by that is maybe lessen the impact of the issue or prevent the issue from happening, right? I would argue, and it's obviously arguable, but with modern technology like photography and social media, I think it's harder for governments to get away with being as abusive as they were in the past. I think at the very least you can make a case for that, right? So that might be something I talk about in my conclusion paragraph to satisfy this last point right here, right? How the issue has continued or has changed over time. And again, we're gonna write a couple of paragraphs together, and that should make things a little bit more clear. For the sake of practice, let's do one more. We'll do a short one. Why don't we turn, if you're following along, could you argue human rights? You can absolutely argue human rights violation, definitely, right? These people's right to liberty is being violated because they're being enslaved. So good call. I can absolutely say human rights violation as an enduring issue. Excellent point. Good call. All right, so that's document 2. I'm gonna head over to document number 4, since it's short and sweet, right? And I don't want this stream to go on too long. I'm gonna try to do one more last minute Regents review tomorrow afternoon. Okay, to give you one last shot at asking me questions before the test, and that'll just be a general Q&A. Today, we're just gonna talk about enduring issues. So, really short, really sweet. Actually, I lied. Let's backtrack one more time. My apologies. It's been a long day, a long week, a long school year. This is gonna sound weird, but the last thing I would recommend doing for every document is give the document some sort of title. Right? So maybe it's the name of a specific historical event, or if it's not an event that you learned about in class, come up with like a 3 or 4 word summary for what happened in that particular document. Okay, so what I'm gonna call this one, and you'll see why I'm doing this later, I'm just gonna call document number 2, the title for document 2, I'm gonna call Belgian Colonization of Congo. And this is going to help me with my introduction paragraph, because they're going to want you to identify some historical events that prove the issue was an issue. So if I say this, I don't have to say, this enduring issue is shown in document number 2, right? I'm going to say, no, the issue is shown in the Belgian colonization of Congo. Again, don't be confused. Check out my other enduring issues videos, okay? Because I provide a list of issues that you can study. And I provide a checklist for all the steps necessary to be successful on this. And identifying or creating a title for a document, I think, is a very important step. Anyway, back to business. Let's go to document number 4. Really short. Source is New York Times, October 2nd, 1946. So if you remember anything from class, that is right after World War II. And we see 12 Nazi war leaders sentenced to be hanged. Goering heads list of those to die by October 16th. Hess gets life, 6 others ordered to prison. Now, there's not a lot said in the source. This is just a New York Times headline, which is both good and bad, because it doesn't give you a lot of information. But if you know anything about this event, since they don't give you a lot, it's a really good opportunity for outside information. So this would be one, if I were to write an essay, a full essay, I would choose this one, because I know a lot. And again, everyone's going to be different, but I know a lot about World War II and what happens after World War II. Right, so I'm going to just highlight here, not 12 Nazi war leaders as maybe the who. The when is October 1946. Maybe I'll highlight that. Hanged, prison, life sentence, right, some of the things that happen. So I'll do main ideas again. So MI. And there's not much to say here, right? But I'm going to say 1946, comma, Nazi leaders. Again, I'm just combining the things I highlighted into a key point here. Sentenced to hanging, comma, imprisonment. and that's about it. All right, and if you know anything about this, right, this refers to the Nuremberg trials, which happens after World War II to punish Nazis for their actions during the Holocaust. None of that is there for you, so that's a really good opportunity for outside information. So I'm going to head to OI for outside information. So the first thing I'm going to write down are historical circumstances, right? Things that are surrounding the event that help explain how or why the event even happens. So maybe I'll write down Nuremberg trials. Forgive my handwriting, it's not good to begin with, and I'm trying to rush through this for the sake of time. So Nuremberg trials, Holocaust is a factor for how/why the Nuremberg trials happen. I'll put Nazis/anti-Semitism, right? If you remember anything about the Nazis, right, they were anti-Semitic, meaning prejudice against Jewish people. I'll put Nuremberg laws. Some might argue that the Nuremberg laws were the first step in the Holocaust story, right? Because that was the set of laws that denied people, Jewish people, their rights, right? Their right to citizenship is taken away from them. Their right to marry non-Jewish Germans is taken away from them. No Jewish newspapers, no Jewish businesses, all that stuff. All right, so that's historical circumstances, right? If I write about these things, I can make it part of the story involving my document summary, which we'll practice a little bit later. But I'm also going to write down some steps that took place later or some similar events, right? So let me clarify that. I'm going to write down some similar events that happened in history to show, again, that maybe whatever problems are here have continued over the course of a long period of time. Or I might write down some things that have happened later in history that fix whatever problems are here or attempt to fix whatever problems that exist in this document. So check out what I'm going to do here. I'm going to write down United Nations / Universal Declaration, I am going to abbreviate here, of Human Rights. Right, so if you remember, after World War II, the United Nations is created. And yes, it's meant to keep world peace, but it's also an organization that has sworn to protect human rights around the world. And if you went on the United Nations website, you could find this document. And it's heavily influenced by the Enlightenment. Right, so this is a reaction to the horrible things associated with the Holocaust. So maybe since we have this, right, in more current times, maybe, human rights violations or whatever problems or issues are here, the impacts are lessened, if that makes any sense. I'm also going to write down, not to confuse you too much, because it's possible you didn't learn about this, I'll say the international. Again, a lot of this is meant to be just general Regents review. So I'm going to talk about things that you might not have heard about in class or not in a while. So International Criminal Court, which was created in 2002, often abbreviated as the ICC. So this is a permanent court system that's set up to prosecute those who have been accused of violating human rights or committing war crimes. All right, very famously, they prosecuted a lot of the people associated with genocide in Yugoslavia that happened in the early to late 90s. Okay, and finally, I'm going to say creation of Israel. Because once Israel's created and there's a state for Jewish people, you can make a strong argument that maybe, anti-Semitism, if we're going to choose that, maybe is an enduring issue, the impact of that would be lessened, right? Because perhaps if Jewish people are the majority in Israel, they would not be subjected to persecution. A lot of stuff there, I know. Finally, let's do some enduring issues, right? So again, this is an important part of the process. Hey, Sophia, thanks for coming to the stream. We want to identify any big, broad problems that have faced humanity that we see here, right? And there's a ton. We could say, again, abuse of power, because the Nazis used their power to do some pretty horrific things. I could say human rights violations, right? Genocide is an example of a human rights violation. I could make genocide its own separate issue. I could say anti-Semitism, because that's certainly a problem that has affected Jewish people throughout a heck of a lot of history. What else can I say? Prejudice in general. is an issue that I see in that document. And yeah, that'll about cover it, right? Abuse of power, human rights violations, genocide, anti-Semitism, and prejudice. Big problems that that humanity has faced for a very long period of time. I think we could find evidence of all that in the Holocaust, in the Nuremberg trials, therefore in this document. Okay, last thing, we want to give this a title, right? I might just simply call this, I don't know, the Nuremberg trials, because I know that this is the historical event talked about in this document, right? If I didn't know that this was about the Nuremberg trials, a different title I could make would just simply be Nazi punishment of Nazi leaders. Maybe I would just call it that if I didn't know that this was about the Nuremberg trials. Impact of appeasement. I think that that's a good enduring issue, but the problem is if you were to write a whole essay about the impacts of appeasement, I think you might have a hard time with outside information because really, in terms of the historical examples from the curriculum, appeasing Hitler might be the only example outside the documents you'd be able to refer to. Okay, but yes, you're right. When it comes to this document, the impacts of appeasement absolutely relate because we should remember that when the British and the French gave in to Hitler, right, that kind of enabled all this horrible stuff to happen. So for 100%, we can make a case that impacts of appeasement does apply here. The only thing is, I'm not sure how enduring the impact of appeasement is, but for sure, you could put that with document number 4. I just don't think we have enough other examples in the rest of these documents to make a case that we could write an essay about it. So, Alex, we can maybe get into that a little bit later about how many points you need to pass. It's a complicated answer, okay? And the essay is not worth as much as the multiple choice, but for a lot of you guys, this could be make or break, right? Some of you guys might need some of the points on this essay to pass this Regents or to do well on the Regents. So let's assume for a second that we're done reading and annotating all 5 of the documents. The next thing you have to do, you have to make a couple of decisions. You first have to decide which enduring issue to write about. Okay, so in my analysis so far, we've seen that the abuse of power comes up in these 2 documents that we've looked at together. And I can tell you, if you looked at the rest of these documents, you would find the abuse of power in pretty much all of them. Okay, so if I see an issue popping up in at least 3 out of the 5, I know I can choose it. Okay, so choose an issue that you think you might know a lot of outside information about, right? I know personally, a ton of examples in history of governments doing some horrible things to the people for its own benefit. So I'm going to choose the abuse of power. Let's assume that all the documents are about abuse of power, or you can make a case that abuse of power is shown in all 5 of the documents. Remember, you don't want to write about all 5. You can, of course, but I think it's better, and I think most people would tell you, it's better to write about 3 with an abundance of outside information. So choose your issue, and then choose the 3 documents that issue appears in that you think you could talk a lot of outside information about. The grammar of that sentence was confusing, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? If the issue appears in more than 3 out of the 5 documents, choose the 3 documents out of those 5 or 4, whatever it is, that you can talk a lot about when it comes to outside information. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so let's assume, for the sake of practice, that abuse of power appears in 3 out of the 5 documents. Therefore, I can write about it. And I'm going to choose whichever 3 documents I think correspond with that issue and I know a lot about. So we're going to work through an example of how to get started on an enduring issues essay, as if we chose 3 documents. I'm not going to write about 3 documents, and I would recommend each document gets its own body paragraph, if you will. And again, check out my checklist on my other enduring issues videos or on this one when I'm done with the live stream. But I'm going to write an example introduction paragraph, an example body paragraph that talks about document 4, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do in my conclusion paragraph. Okay, and what I would recommend doing in my introduction paragraph, I think a great way to start an enduring issues essay is to simply tell the reader what enduring issue means. Okay, so here I go. I'm going to indent, I'm going to say, and I apologize if this is slow and boring, but I'm not going to be able to edit the live stream here. So I'm going to say an enduring issue, and your definition might vary, but I'm going to say an enduring issue is a continuing or long-lasting problem in history. If an essay comes across my desk that starts like that, I know that the student who's writing this essay knows what's going on, right? Because we're already defining what enduring issue means. So that's great. The next thing I'm going to do in my introduction paragraph is state which enduring issue I'm going to write about. But I'm not going to say the enduring issue I'm going to talk about in my essay is, right? That sounds maybe like something we would say in elementary school or middle school. There's nothing wrong with that, but I try to have my students strive to be a little bit more professional when it comes to the writing. So I'm going to say one example of an enduring issue. Let me just go ahead and write that. One example of an enduring issue is the abuse of power. Period. So clearly, just a quick question. This Regents is 1750s to the present. Yes, that's correct. Okay, there's no 9th grade social studies on your Regents. But that brings me to another point. You can absolutely write about 9th grade stuff in this essay, and it would count as outside information. Okay, it's perfectly valid. You can mention United States history stuff in this essay. You can mention 9th grade stuff in this essay, as long as it's part of like your outside information, right? So if I'm writing an essay about the abuse of power, I can certainly write about maybe a Roman emperor who did some horrific stuff. Maybe Roman emperors, I don't know, enslaved people, put Christians in the Colosseum and made them fight in gladiator contests. I would call that an abuse of power, right? Using their power to suit their own interests and maybe removing a Christian influence or just simply entertaining a crowd, right, to maybe prevent a rebellion. So again, you can write about 9th grade stuff on this essay, but in terms of multiple choice, yes, 1750 to the present, which is just the 10th grade curriculum. So my second sentence in my enduring issues essay, I'm identifying the issue. And if I do that, I'm already tackling my guides here, my guideline for success, I guess you could say, because I identified an enduring issue right there in my second sentence. I did not explain it yet. That's going to be my next sentence, right? So here's where I'm going to define it the best I can, right? So I'll say, this is when a person, group, or government uses its authority in unfair, harmful, or illegal ways. In order to suit their own interests. Your definition for the enduring issue does not have to be perfect, okay? And again, if you check out my other enduring issues videos and find my enduring issues list, you'll find that I didn't just list issues, I also provided definitions. But do the best you can, okay? Make an attempt to explain what the issue means. Now I've already done bullet point number 1, right? I've taken care of that bullet point in just the first couple of sentences of my whole essay. How many pages should the essay be? It's hard to say. I would say 3 pages would be great, right? Because that would kind of indicate that your summaries are well detailed and you're including outside information. But again, it depends on how big your handwriting is and the degree of by which you're writing outside information, if you will. So next, what I want to do now is just simply give the reader a taste of how or why abuse of power is a problem by just giving some general effects of the issue, right? These are the things I'm going to write more about later in my essay. So I'll say the abuse of power can have many effects on people, comma, such as, and these are examples that I might find in my analysis of the documents, right? So I'll say, I don't know, such as the loss of civilian life, which we know happened during the Holocaust due to the abuse of power shown by the Nazis. I might say being enslaved, which is something seen in the Belgian Congo. And maybe I'll say, and this came up in a different document, I'm providing an introduction paragraph for an essay that focuses on more than just one document or two documents. So maybe I'll say, and it also sometimes leads to protest movements. Against governments. So again, just giving the reader a sense of why, how and why this is a problem. Hey, Emmy, what's up, kiddo? One more sentence, okay? And this is the reason why, going back to these documents for a second, this is the reason why I'm giving each of the documents some sort of a title. Because in my last sentence of the introduction paragraph, I'm not going to say the impacts of abuse of power are shown in documents 1, 2, and 4, if those are the ones I'm using. I'm going to write down specific historical events. And then I'll mention these specific historical events again in the topic sentences for my body paragraphs. Okay, so check out what I'm going to do here. I'm going to say Belgian colonization of the Congo. I'll say of Congo, comma, right? And that's the event we associated with, what was it, document number 2 or 3? I'm forgetting at the moment, document number 2, right? So Belgian colonization of the Congo, the Nuremberg trials, which is document 4, and the use of chemical weapons in Iraq. You might be wondering, where did I get this from? All right, this is going to come, we didn't talk about it together for the sake of time, but I believe, yes, it's true, this is document number 5 in the Enduring Issues essay. So document 5 also could be used as an example of abuse of power because the leader of Iraq used chemical weapons against his own people in an attempt to stay in power, right? I would call that maybe abuse of authority or power. So Belgian colonization of Congo, the Nuremberg trials, and the use of chemical weapons in Iraq are 3 events that show the impacts of abuse of power. If you guys write an introduction paragraph like this on the Enduring Issues essay, not only are you going to blow away the grader, but you're also taking care of a couple of bullet points right off the bat. So even though you don't have a full essay here, you're not getting a 0 on this essay, right? I couldn't tell you, what it's going, every year the grading rubric is a little bit different for these exams. So I'm not going to stand here and say, or sit here and say how many points this would give you on the essay, but it's some, okay? And sometimes just some could be make or break for passing. Quick question here. What's the name of your video that has the definitions of the Enduring Issues? Definitions of the Enduring Issues. Check out, again, if you go on my channel and go to my playlists, I have playlists specifically for the Enduring Issues essay. Any one of those videos in the description should have my list of Enduring Issues that you can copy and paste. It should come up in a Google Doc format. So by all means, just copy and paste that text into a new Google Doc as a way to save it on your own or take screenshots. All right, so that's my introduction paragraph. Now what I'm going to do, I'm not going to write a full essay, right? We're already 48 minutes into this live stream. I'm sure I'm boring some of you guys quite a bit. I'm going to write a body paragraph just about document number 4. Okay, I would recommend a body paragraph for each of the documents and then a conclusion paragraph where we talk about other examples of the issue that are not in the documents and maybe some attempts to lessen the impacts of that issue. So I'm going to write a body paragraph just about document number 4. In a full essay, you would write 2 more body paragraphs, 1 for each of the other documents you're writing about. So I'm going to indent, I'm going to say the Holocaust. I'll do the Nuremberg trials. Sorry, not the Holocaust. The Nuremberg trials is one event that shows the impact of the abuse of power. Again, it's another reason why I would encourage you to give each document some sort of historical title, because I can use that same title as a topic sentence. Right now, I'm conveying to the reader what this paragraph is going to be about. And since we were able to do it, right, if you go back to our document notes, we wrote down a bunch of historical circumstances for the Nuremberg trials. So before we start writing about the trials themselves, give some backstory. If you are able to do that, you're going to satisfy their requirement for outside information. Okay, so I'm going to say prior to the trials, which indicates I'm about to provide some sort of historical context or backstory. So prior to the trials, comma, the Nazis came to power in Germany. And Adolf Hitler quickly created a fascist, comma, totalitarian state. Okay, fascism is you can say a political system that outlaws competing political parties, that's typically governed by a dictator. Human rights are not the priority, and it's a form of extreme nationalism. Right? It's not really known for providing people with human rights. Right? It's all about the needs of the state. Totalitarianism is when the government controls every aspect of your life. All right, so I'm going to say that. I'll say Hitler. Again, this is all backstory. I haven't talked about the trials yet. I'm demonstrating my knowledge of outside information. All right, so Hitler was very anti-Semitic, which is, again, another word for prejudice against Jewish people. So Hitler was very anti-Semitic, comma, and blamed Jewish people for Germany's economic problems and for Germany's loss in World War I. Capitalize World War I because it's a specific historical event. I probably could have dropped in the term scapegoat, right? But I didn't do that here, and that's totally okay. Draw with Cindy, explain all three. Yes, you're going to write about one enduring issue. Use 3 documents to describe one enduring issue. All right, so Germany's loss in World War I. Again, I'm still providing historical circumstances here. In the 1930s, these are all things I wrote about in my notes. I'm just elaborating on them now and putting them into full sentences. In the 1930s, comma, Hitler passed the Nuremberg laws. Comma, which denied Jews their civil rights. Period. Later, comma, during the Holocaust, comma, what could we say here? Later in the Holocaust, the Nazis committed genocide against the Jews in concentration camps. Period. All right, so again, a very long paragraph, and I'll post this, this example piece of writing in the description once the live stream is over. But so far, I still have not talked about the trials themselves. I've provided a bunch of backstory. This is not something you're always going to remember to do or be able to do, but if you can do it, right? You don't need the same amount of, let me try that again. You don't need the same amount of outside information for every document, so plug it in where you can. Not every paragraph is probably going to be the same amount of sentences here. So now let me talk about the trials themselves. So I'm going to start summarizing the actual document itself. So I'll say in 1946, okay, why do I know 1946? Because it was given to me in the documents. So in 1946, comma, once World War II had ended, comma, we could say the Nuremberg trials were held to punish the Nazis responsible for the Holocaust. One more thing I could say in terms of my summary, right? Something about the punishments that the Nazis faced, right? So I'm going to squeeze that in here on the bottom. Maybe I'll say, let me just make some room here for myself. Sorry about that. Hang on. Something about the sentences, right? The after the trials were over, right? So maybe I'll say some Nazi leaders were sentenced to hanging. Comma, while others, I'm gonna have to move to the next page here, while others were imprisoned. And check out what I'm gonna do next. I'm gonna drop in parentheses, doc 4, close parentheses, period. Okay, this is called a document citation, and this is something I would recommend dropping in after you're done summarizing the who, what, when, where, and why in document 4. Now, technically, you do not have to do this. You will not be penalized if you don't do it. But I can tell you, as a social studies teacher who does grade the Regents exams with the rest of my department, we grade a ton of these things. I work in a very large school, and it takes like 2, maybe 3 days to get through them all. And we spend the entire day just reading these things. So sometimes our vision will get blurry, right? We'll start seeing cross-eyed. So anything you can do to convey to the reader that you're using something from a document, you know, like using a document citation, do it, all right? It'll make it easier for the reader to grade your work, right? If they don't, you know, it'll be harder for them to miss an important thing in your essay if you do this. So I cannot recommend enough that you do that. Okay, so I'm done with my document summary. I'm done with an entire body paragraph. So I have an introduction paragraph, I have a body paragraph where I provided historical circumstances, and a document summary. If this was a full essay, I would move on to writing about another document, providing, again, historical circumstances if I can, and a document summary. One of the things I would recommend doing, right, to avoid maybe paragraphs being so different in terms of size, right? If you're writing about a different event now, like maybe you have to write about the use of chemical weapons in Iraq, and you don't know a lot of outside information for ethnic conflict in the Middle East, right? Maybe instead of having a lot of historical circumstances, maybe you have a longer document summary where you include more details, because you don't want to have one paragraph be a page long, and then your next paragraph be like 2 sentences. Okay, so do what you can to try to even things out a little bit. If I had more time, I would go over every document in terms of historical circumstances. You can make not to get too off track, you can make a case that the British and the French creating mandates in the Middle East after World War I is a reason why this ethnic and religious conflict in Iraq, because Iraq did not exist until after World War I. And when they, just like with Africa, when they redrew the map of the Middle East, they put groups together that did not normally live together, and that caused some issues. But I digress. So, conclusion paragraph. What I recommend doing in the conclusion paragraph, and every teacher teaches this a little bit differently. The conclusion paragraph is where I have my students take care of this right here. How the issue has continued to be an issue or has changed over time. So we might write about some other events in history that show the impact of the abuse of power that's not in the documents. And that can go all the way up into today, right? You can make a case that today, up until what, December 2024, that the government of Syria abused its power by, using, I believe, you could fact check me on this, but allegedly, I think the Assad regime used chemical weapons against its own people in Syria. That's an abuse of power that happened very, very recently that you can use in a conclusion paragraph. So more examples from history that show the abuse of power over time, right? So it could be like before the documents or after the documents or in between the documents, if you will. Even ninth grade stuff, like I said, maybe Roman emperors abused their power. So we're going to write about some other events that are not in the documents that show abuse of power. And we're going to make a case that things have happened in this world that have changed the impact of the issue, right? Maybe the United Nations prevents the abuse of power from happening to the same degree. Maybe photography and social media prevent the same degree of power being abused. Maybe the International Criminal Court prevents the same amount of human rights violations in the world. Or maybe the abolition of slavery around the world prevents the abuse of power in the future. So check out what I'm going to do here. First thing I'm going to do in my conclusion paragraph is start with a topic sentence, right? Make the case. I'm going to make the case that this is an issue that continues over time. So I'm going to say, this is my conclusion paragraph now. I'm not doing a full essay. The abuse of power, that's my enduring issue for the whole essay, has been an enduring issue across history. Now I'm going to make a case that it does not just appear in a couple of documents, it appears in other time periods as well. So I'll say, for example, how about this? How about in addition, you don't have to have this sentence, but I think it provides a nice flow. In addition to the examples already discussed, and again, this is why we do a lot of brainstorming when we analyze our documents, comma, the abuse of power has occurred in other time periods and regions. But if I'm going to make a case like that, I better provide an example, right? So I'll say, for example, comma, in the early 2000s, comma, the government of Sudan was accused of committing genocide in the Darfur region. In response to, this is going to sound very extra, in response to a separatist movement. Okay, Sudan is one of those countries that started out basically as a British colony, and the British put people together in Sudan that did not necessarily get along, and South Sudan became a thing. Darfur, the people of Darfur see themselves as being a little bit different from the rest of the Sudanese, and they kind of wanted out. And the Sudanese government abused its power by trying to wipe out the Darfurians, right? How is that an abuse of power, right? They're using their power to suit their own interests. They want to keep their country together. They feel like they would rather have control over more land. They don't want to let the Darfurians go. Okay, so I can maybe say here, as a result, comma, many innocent civilians were killed. Okay, and we could go on. We could write about more, right? In the one that I put together for my own students to kind of analyze and critique, is we could say something about the slavery conditions in Haiti, how that led to, or how that's an example of the abuse of French power, right? Their interests were profiting off of owning a colony. And the way they did that was to enslave the African population, right, to grow sugar in Haiti, and how that led to a revolution. I'm not going to write that here for the sake of time, but talk about a couple examples of how the enduring issue occurs in other places and in other time periods. Because if you do that, again, you prove that the issue is continuing, right, or has continued over time, and we're including outside information, right? Two birds with one stone. But what I would try to do as well, and this is where we're going to wrap this thing up, everyone in the whole state is taking the Regents on Wednesday, and there's no word count. Write as much as you can, quite honestly. Before we're done here, even though this is great, right, I'm going to try to write 4 or 5 out of 5. And what I'm going to try to do, since I can, is talk about something that shows how the issue has changed over time. Meaning we've done some things to lessen the impact of the abuse of power. So maybe I'll just mention something about the United Nations, right? So I'm going to transition over to that. Maybe I'll simply say, despite these abuses, comma, there have been efforts to reduce the impacts what could we say? Reduce the impacts of governments abusing power. A little repetitive with the words there, but that's okay. Again, I'm a little bit off the cuff at the moment. I just want to get this thing done for you guys. Right, so we could say maybe, for example, always want to support with facts. The United Nations, we talked about this when we analyzed the documents, right, was created after World War II. And has sworn to protect human rights around the world, which would stop governments from abusing power. Right? I could also mention something about the International Criminal Court. Or, right, I probably should have used something a little bit more interesting, right? I could say that a development that has reduced the impact of abuse of power is the invention of photography and social media, right? Because governments cannot get away with the same degree of abuse because people will find out about it. And if people find out about it, because maybe a picture has gone viral, right, maybe they stop their horrible actions. Let's just do that for the sake of practice, and then I promise I'll wrap this thing up. I'll just say how maybe additionally, good transitional phrase. Additionally, photography and social media, like, I don't know, what's an app you kids like to use, right? Facebook's for us old people. What is it? I don't know, TikTok. Social media like TikTok. If I even spelled that right, I don't know, I'm too old for TikTok. Social media like TikTok have made abuses viral, which puts pressure on governments to end their abuses. Right, I should probably change up the grammar of that sentence, right? Have made abuses viral, or maybe have made examples of abuses gone viral. Might be a more grammatically correct sentence, but I think you get the idea here, okay? So in your conclusion paragraph, again, I'm writing for the perfect score here, and I know a lot of information. You guys might not have that luxury. But when you read your documents, brainstorm as many other examples in history that show some of the issues that are reflected in that source, right? So, other examples of human rights violations in history, or brainstorm events in history that might lessen the impact of an enduring issue. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to go in your conclusion paragraph, right? So I put another example in history that's not in the documents that shows a government abusing its power. And I wrote about a couple of things that have happened in history in more recent times that should, in theory, prevent governments from abusing their power as much, which shows how the issue has changed over time, right? Photography is new. Social, like TikTok, is only in the last couple of years, okay? Not an easy essay to write. It's easy if you don't include outside information, right? Because you're just basically summarizing documents, right? And maybe your conclusion paragraph is just a quick summary of what you've already stated. But if you want to get that perfect score, you want to have an abundance of outside information. And that can come from what I've done in the conclusion paragraph here. Another way to include it is in your historical circumstances for discussing the documents. So we're an hour and 10 minutes in. I thought this would be a lot shorter. Hopefully I did not bore you all to tears. Please revisit this video I'm gonna, like I said, I'll post in the description some of my resources. But if you're anxious to see those things now, check out my channel's homepage, go to my playlists. I have a whole playlist for Enduring Issues essay review where I do this more thoroughly and I type things out so it's less sloppy, okay? But hopefully this is helpful. I'm gonna try to do one more live stream tomorrow afternoon for like a last minute Q&A because your Regents exam is Wednesday morning. Does anyone have any last minute questions? Otherwise, I'm gonna wrap things up for today. Could outside info be both from the past and more modern news? Absolutely, Sophia. Right, like I said a little bit earlier, in your conclusion paragraph, you could absolutely say here, right, another example of the abuse of power is the Roman emperors, enslaving people and having them fight in the Colosseum. Okay, you can go back far, you can go into the future, as long as you talk about some outside examples, right? Then you're going to demonstrate that the issue has continued over a very long period of time. So absolutely, go to U.S. history, go to 9th grade history, go to what's happening in the world right now. You can do all of that, and that would be good outside information to show how the issue continues over a long period of time. Again, Alex, it's kind of a loaded question. It's hard to say how many points you need to pass. Check out the rubric on the state website. Maybe I'll post that in the description. You got to get a lot of questions right, and it varies according to each Regents exam. Again, every Regents is a little bit different in terms of how many points that you need to pass. But yeah, you got to do well. Definitely rock the multiple choice in the CRQ. That'll put some less pressure on the essay, but get some points on this essay. It could be make or break. Any other questions before I wrap things up for today? Was this helpful? Did you guys learn something today? Did anyone ever write an Enduring Issues essay in the past? You got it, Jen. I'm glad I could help. Please check out my other videos. It's a great way to review for the Regents at the last minute, especially the multiple choice guys, because if you go through my multiple choice videos, right, some of the outside information that might apply to these essays might start to stick a little bit, right? But thanks for so much for watching this stream. Please study hard for your Regents, and best of luck to you guys. I'll see you tomorrow afternoon.